Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another broadcast of AML Gray Matters. Today we have with us returning guest Justine Plankowitz from Claritas Compliance Limited, based in the Cayman Islands. Thank you for returning, Justine. So I hope you're doing well and everything is nice and sunny in the Cayman Islands right now.
Thank you so much for
Okay.
having me back. And yes, we're enjoying great weather here as always.
As always, yeah, before it gets too hot, because I know I've been there in June and July, and it gets pretty hot down there sometimes. I hope everybody's doing well. A special warm welcome to Silo users, new subscribers. So those of you who have not been here before, my name is Kimberly Smith. I am a former compliance officer and MLRO, and I am also the founder of Silo Compliance Systems. And so a very warm welcome to all of our users. Silo users, also a warm welcome to regulators. I know we get a lot of regulators, people who work at regulators joining us, and so thank you for joining us. And we'll go ahead and get started here. Oh, sorry, I've moved too fast. Let my slides there. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Just so you know, this is not legal advice. It's almost as if you're hearing a conversation between two compliance geeks in a coffee shop. However, you are welcome to post questions or comments in the questions box. I don't think the chat box works in these webinars, but I do keep an eye on the questions field. So even if you don't have a specific question, go ahead and put in a comment, because we will be having some polls and asking for a little bit of your feedback and engagement as well. So I can kind of pass those to Justine, and that can be part of the conversation. So again, yes, we do have some polls. We do keep it at exactly 1 hour. That usually means we're rushing at the end, so bear with us there. For those joining the live broadcast today, 15th of May, 2024, you will get a certificate of participation, and those are emailed out to you about 1 hour after the end of this broadcast. And the recording will be sent out in a few days via email to all registrants. And for anybody who wants copies of the slides, I guess I should ask, Justine, it will be okay for us to share your slides? Okay, great. You can request those, and there will be an email address for you to request those. And anybody who wants to see any of our previous, sorry, I got a pop-up bot coming up. Anybody who wants to see previous recordings of AML Gray Matters, you can go to the silocompliance.com resources page, and we have lots of interesting recordings there on so many different topics, from proliferation financing to the FATF, changes to the 5th round of mutual evaluation reviews. And again, just thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us. We hope you find these broadcasts very useful. This is kind of our community service to help people stay up to date on all things compliance in this very fast and changing world. Justine is taking her time and her experience. And Justine, again, thank you. I know putting together these slides and doing the research takes up a lot of time, and you're doing it for free for all of us to also help the community. So thank you very much for your time. And I'm going to let you, or I guess what I really should do is we should kick off with the first poll. So Tom, and a big thank you to Tom as well, who watches my back and puts together all the slides for me when I'm very busy. So yeah, so our first polling question is, what do you think will be the most important changing or emerging risk in the next 2 to 3 years in the area of AML and I guess terrorist financing? So yeah, so we've got some results coming in. So far, only about 20% of you have voted. So please take a moment to pick one that you think. And Justine, while everybody's thinking about this, you and I talked earlier about horizon scanning. Do you have a slide on horizon scanning, or do you want to kind of introduce that subject matter while we're letting people do some polls?
Yes, definitely. So thank you everyone for coming and participating in this webinar. I think it's a really, really important topic in terms of horizon scanning and understanding how your work, your day-to-day work in AML, in CFT, is connected to the outside world. So it's really important to keep yourself up to date on what's happening in the world. The AML CFT regulatory regime often changes in response to events, geopolitical events or economic events that happen around the world. And so when you read the newspapers, when you listen to podcasts, you listen to current events, it's then much easier to try to analyze how will that impact on the regulatory regime for AML CFT. And this horizon scanning exercise, I don't really like to call it an exercise because it's really something that you should be doing on an ongoing basis. It's not something that you look at once a year. The world is constantly evolving. You need to understand how your AML CFT program fits into this wider world. So it's something that on an ongoing basis, keep yourself informed and always be mindful of thinking how would this impact on the future AML CFT regulation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, I'll go ahead and end that poll. And just so you know, see, did we, Tom, are you able to share the results of the poll?
Yeah, they're being shared.
Okay, great. So yeah, I saw that the majority, 64%, so 175 people said cryptocurrency was they thought was the big emerging risk. Would you agree with that, Justine?
Definitely, definitely. And so there was no right or wrong answer, right, in the poll. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit, it's not an exam question. But there are definitely themes that come up when we do this horizon scanning, when we look at what's happening in the world. And I would definitely put cryptocurrencies at number one because it affects so many other aspects of AML CFT regulation. So
Okay.
um, let's look at how the cryptocurrencies fit in, how terrorist financing fits in. As I said, there's no right or wrong answer. So you will see that we'll talk about changes to terrorism financing methods, proliferation financing, sanctions evasion. So all of these, to some extent, will be a feature in what we're going to talk about today. So first,
Okay.
obviously I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. So, but I can tell you what international organizations have said they're thinking about, what their priorities and strategic goals are. So, as you know, worldwide regulation for AML CFT is very much inspired by the FATF and other similar bodies like Egmont, Interpol, etc. So obviously what they're thinking will impact on your regulatory obligations somewhere down the road. We will look at emerging trends in terrorism financing. So terrorism financing right now is a very, very hot topic, and it's one that is evolving very rapidly, very quickly. And so we will talk about what's happening there. Obviously, sanctions and sanctions evaders, both from a Russia perspective, but also other types of sanctions. Um, what has changed? How have sanctions evasion techniques changed? And then we'll look a little bit. We'll take a little bit of a different road and look at artificial intelligence because all of this is very, very difficult sometimes to keep on top of. And then, of course, you have what we know to be your day-to-day tasks in your compliance practice. And so there are ways that you can improve your compliance practice with artificial intelligence to allow you to maybe delegate some of these more manual tasks to AI or machine learning to allow you to focus on the bigger picture. So
Yeah,
we can.
yeah. And we actually did a webinar on AI and some of the pros and cons. So for those of you who are interested in AI tools, do go to our resources page at silocompliance.com and you can watch that at will. I don't think actually, I take that back. That was when the recording, there was a technical glitch on the platform. We didn't have the recording. But it was really good. So I'm sure we will be talking about AI in the future because so much is happening with AI tools. I'm sure many of you did see the announcement yesterday or the day before that ChatGPT can now talk. And so for anybody who watched the movie Her some years ago, that has come true. So it's fascinating to watch AI, what's coming out.
And again, AI evolving very, very quickly. So, and we'll see at the end, some of the tools are still a little bit clunky, maybe a little bit expensive, but it is definitely something to keep on top of and watch out for. So, let's turn first to international organizations, the work that has been done in the last year or so. So one of the very hot topics that we've been talking about for the last couple of years is beneficial ownership transparency. You might have heard the FATF amended Recommendation 24, which deals with transparency of legal persons. So when you have companies, limited partnerships, etc. And now this year, the FATF amended, or late last year, I should say, amended Recommendation 25, which deals with transparency of legal arrangements. So here we're talking about trusts and similar vehicles. And the FATF has issued new guidance on Recommendation 25, and you can find that on the FATF's website. The guidance is both for financial services providers as well as regulators. So, of course, the regulators now will take this guidance and they will compare their own approach to what the FATF recommends. And so you might see some changes happening there as your regulator works through their compliance with the FATF recommendations. Now, one of the interesting things that FATF said when they issued this new guidance is that this marks the end of the official work on beneficial ownership. And certainly when we had looked at the program before, we would have thought that this completed the work. I think that's not quite true, and we'll see that a little bit later on when we look at FATF's strategic priorities, but officially this would have marked the end of that package of reforms. The next thing that FATF has issued clarification on, which I think was a very good clarification, was on the regulation of nonprofit organizations. So as you might know, there's always a tension in the FATF recommendations relating to the regulation of nonprofit organizations between the need to curtail the risk of terrorist financing through nonprofit organizations on the one hand, and the need to not impede the work of legitimate nonprofit organizations. And sometimes FATF thought that some countries went too far, let's say in the regulation of nonprofit organizations, and then of course then there's disadvantages because you are impeding those social benefits from materializing. So FATF did revise its guidance on the regulation of nonprofit organizations to emphasize this need for financial inclusion and to emphasize that the nonprofit organizations that should really be looked at closely by the regulator are only those that are at higher risk of terrorist financing. Now, this is also really important for your practice as a financial service provider. So oftentimes, when I look at my clients, let's say risk assessment matrix, I see that nonprofit organizations are generally considered to be high-risk customers. And so I think it's really important to be cognizant of the fact that FATF says that the majority of nonprofit organizations are not actually high risk for terrorist financing in most jurisdictions. So it's important for you as a financial service provider looking at your risk assessment matrix, how you treat nonprofit organizations. Because FATF does say that the treatment of nonprofit organizations should facilitate financial inclusion. Asset recovery. So some of you might know the statistic. So it's been the statistic that's been kind of thrown around for many years now. Obviously, it's very, very hard to pinpoint, exactly what the figure is. But the statistic that's frequently cited is that only about 1 to 1.5% of the proceeds of criminal activities are actually ever recovered. Now, it's very difficult to know because you don't really know how much crime there is. So you can't, you don't know the crime that you have not identified. So there's obviously different models that are used to estimate that. But you can see, even from what we know, it's a very, very, very low percentage of assets that are actually recovered, which means that at the end of the day, crime mostly pays. So FATF is focusing on increasing the tools available for asset recovery, and also using asset recovery networks. So in many jurisdictions, many jurisdictions are part of regional asset recovery networks. So for example, in the Caribbean, we have ARN Carib, and there's various other ARNs around the world. So that's a very interesting paper on FATF, and I think that trend of enhancing asset recovery, enhancing the tools of the police, of investigators, that will continue. FATF did a very interesting study on misuse of citizenship and residency by investment. I thought this was really interesting because, as you know, programs of citizenship and residency by investments are not part of what we typically think of as regulated financial businesses. But of course, there is a grave danger in those kinds of programs being misused by persons who seek to disguise their identity or to maybe flee certain jurisdictions because they have committed some crimes. So I think that there will be a bit more focus from FATF on this particular issue. Money laundering, terrorist financing risks in the arts and antiquities was another paper that FATF issued. This became kind of to the forefront when we saw a lot of looting of antiquities, for example, in Syria, to fund terrorist financing purposes. Again, not a topic that's often talked about because in a lot of jurisdictions, art dealers and antiquity dealers are not part of regulated entities. So I think that this is another one of those scope issues that in the long run we might see come to the forefront. The next paper, again, another mostly unregulated activity in a lot of places in the world is crowdfunding. So FATF issued a paper, crowdfunding for terrorism financing. Terrorist financiers are increasingly using crowdfunding techniques. And when we talk about crowdfunding, we talk about, it's not necessarily cryptocurrencies. It can also be through fiat currencies, through the use of, for example, online platforms to raise money for certain causes. So again, another issue of scope for our FATF standards. And then, as they do every year, FATF issued a review of the implementation of standards on VASPs, and we'll look at that a little bit later on. So next slide, please. So turning to look ahead at the FATF strategic priorities. So in mid-April, FATF issued a paper that describes what they will be looking at in the next couple of years. So these are their biggest, right now, what they see as the biggest concerns. And the first one is misuse of virtual assets. No surprise there. The second one is terrorism financing. Again, not really surprising given what's going on in the world. Proliferation financing. This is a really interesting one. So proliferation financing the field has been fairly stagnant in the last few years in terms of new typologies or new schemes, or, there's kind of this deadlock, we can say, between, North Korea, what North Korea does and how it raises its funds, and how the rest of the world reacts. There's been a shift, which we'll talk a little bit about later, about some of the dynamics here are going to change, and that will be really interesting to see. And then the last but not the least priorities for FATF were asset recovery and anti-corruption. So again, strengthening those anti-corruption frameworks, as well as the asset recovery frameworks and the FATF standards relating to asset recovery. So next slide, please. So at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that there's a whole host of international organizations that could have an impact on AML CFT regulation around the world. And of course, we know about FATF, but there's some that we don't talk about as often. And this includes Interpol, as well as the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. These organizations came out with a statement that many commentators thought that was kind of unprecedented. So these three organizations issued a statement. It was called an urgent call for action. And the three organizations highlighted the need to continue to dismantle illegal financial networks that sustain terrorism and transnational crimes, and that the policy reforms and capacity building. So capacity building, we mean, ability of countries to have effective AML CFT frameworks. Those three organizations called on those efforts to be accelerated. So very interesting statement. Just the fact that this kind of statement was issued, and also it shows that we're at this critical period in time right now for issues relating to global security and financial stability. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's turn our attention. So I mentioned one of the main uh, priorities of the FATF will be terrorist financing. And there has been quite a bit of change in the landscape relating to terrorist financing. So it's been a while, I think, since we heard about ISIL and Al Qaeda, and maybe some people kind of just think that they're there in the background, but actually, those organizations. So intelligence shows that these organizations are actually growing. They are still fundraising, and more they are fundraising using crypto assets. They move those crypto assets. It makes it easy to use these crypto assets to move funds within their organization and also with related organizations at a regional level. They use online platforms to request donations, such as crowdfunding. So crowdfunding, for example, GoFundMe would be a crowdfunding platform. Or they make up clubs and they use membership fees, and so they raise money by raising membership fees. Now, of course, this is much more difficult to identify um, in terms of activity that in the financial system. So membership fees could not necessarily be flagged, for example, in a banking context or in an MSD context. And then they also the other means of fundraising are overt commercial activities. So ISIL and Al Qaeda operatives are organizing events. They're selling merchandise, and they're also purchasing real estate. So very commercial activities. Again, not traditionally what we think about as terrorist financing, but we need to look at terrorist financing in a broader sense now, to incorporate those kind of non-financial activities. The second trend in terrorist financing in the last couple of years is extreme right-wing terrorism. And so Egmont, which is the International Group Association of Financial Intelligence Units, did a study on extreme right-wing terrorism. And there are some features of extreme right-wing terrorists that make it much more difficult to detect this kind of terrorism financing. So first is that the terrorist groups globally might not be connected. So they're very regional groups. Around the world, the groups lack a coherent ideology, cause, narrative, or religion. So again, people or small groups operating on their own, which makes it much more difficult to identify. And a lot of their funding comes from government benefits and other self-financing methods. So including, for example, live streaming, sale of items, and sale of propaganda. Next slide.
Are there any red flags that we should, so if I was onboarding somebody and they did have like commercial activities and such as events, and you said merchandise and even real estate, are there any particular red flags that we're looking for to identify, other than, I mean, I know that in our world we're always looking at the individuals behind the company and we're trying to do our screening against them. At the end of the day, it's so hard to spot if the names don't show up on screening lists, which of course just means they haven't been caught yet if they are the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of any red flags that we should be looking for?
Well, I think that and this is kind of a very universal red flag, but also a very good indicator, is activity that's not consistent with what you know about the customer, right? So if you know that the customer does, that they're an event management company, maybe you can go look at, their event management company page, or have a look at their inflows and outflows and try to figure out the patterns in there. Figure out unusual spending patterns as well. So, knowing your customer is always the best defense to basically identifying where funds can be misused for terrorist financing.
Okay. So it's mostly going to be reliant on the banks and not like a corporate service provider. I guess an accountant would see bank statements and maybe see, some inconsistency or where the funds didn't get moved to. Yeah, I come from for those who don't know, I come from a corporate service trust provider background and not a banking background. What about insurance? Are insurance companies kind of needing to are in a position to see some of these red flags?
So, probably not. Although, so you have to remember, so general insurance. So when we talk about insurance for property casualty, car insurance, house insurance, etc., they are not included as regulated entities under the FATF standards. So technically, they don't really have the requirement to do KYC, CDD on their customers. Oftentimes they will because it is good practice. So they could see, for example, patterns in like insurance claims. And there has been cases where um, there have been like insurance ring frauds, basically that people orchestrated vehicle accidents to collect this paycheck and then use that money to fund a terrorist attack. Rare, but it has happened. So yes, it is possible. But again, corporate service providers will not necessarily be the place, the entities that would detect this, because in terms of extreme right-wing terrorism, you have it's like would be like a group of individuals, so they wouldn't really be, for example, corporate as a company. They wouldn't have like a let's say like a trust, or it's a very loosely organized group. So I think the bank accounts of these individuals would be the best place to detect this kind of activity.
Okay, thank you.
So the next really, really important topic, given what's going on right now in the world, especially Israel and Palestine, is Hamas. So of course, Hamas is designated as a terrorist organization in many countries in the world. But Hamas is a little bit of an odd creature because it is also the governing party in the Gaza Strip. So before the war, the main terrorist financing technique, or the main financing technique of Hamas, was a usual government business. So taxes, fees, and government revenues. Some of it were used to run the country, and some of it were used um, to, to, to fund money to basically armed groups within Hamas. Now, of course, this government in Gaza has pretty much collapsed, and so this source of revenue is not available to Hamas anymore. And so now they have been looking at other sources of funding. One is that they solicit donations over social media. Again, remembering that when people funnel money to terrorist organizations, it's often in small amounts. It often comes from legitimate sources. So you really, if you're a bank or an MSB, you're really looking at where this money is going to, as opposed to where it's coming from. Hamas has started engaging in crowdfunding, again, platforms such as GoFundMe. I mean, obviously not GoFundMe, but similar platforms, perhaps more regional platforms. Hamas has a huge portfolio of investments. The countries that hold where these investments are held include the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Sudan, and Turkey. They also get a lot of funding from Iran. And this funding from Iran is channeled via Algeria, Lebanon, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Turkey. And so suddenly, when we look, for example, at our country risk and the country risk assessments that we do, we see really how wide the analysis needs to be. So the analysis of country risk, for example, in the case of Iran, would not just be limited to Iran. It would be also have to include those other countries that are used by Iran, or that allow themselves to be used by Iran to basically fund these terrorist activities. Hamas has also been known to use sham charities, so fake charities that are basically pretend to be a real charity, but really it is a front for Hamas. And they also have been in the past used virtual currencies as well as stable coins, but they stopped using them for a while because they discovered that transactions on the blockchain can be easily traced. But now it seems like because their basically main source of revenue has collapsed, they are going back to using virtual currencies and stable coins for funding. So this is kind of a changing picture. But again, you see how central the use of virtual currencies is to terrorist financing.
Has there been any reports or articles that you've seen linking AI tools and frauds with virtual currencies? Like, I believe I saw an article the other day about how, I mean, millions of dollars just kind of disappeared. I don't know if it was AI related or not, but somebody has actually put in the comments, do you not see AI as an even bigger potential risk to crypto? He said, I see the industry getting to a point of such reliance on AI that it will be very open to misuse, hacking, and genuine errors. And I agree with that. I think we have to be very, very careful. Has there been any indication that that's occurring now?
Not to my knowledge, but so right now, what I see is still a very manual, not AI driven process in like including hacking and when we talk about hacking by North Korea and so on, still groups of people, not so much AI driven. But I completely agree about the AI risks. I think that AI can be a very helpful tool, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But it definitely has some major challenges, and it's also not a complete solution to all of our problems. So AI can be a tool that we use to help us, but we still need that human element, that human input, and the whole governance and oversight framework of artificial intelligence. All right, so closely connected to Hamas, we have Iran. So Iran, again, gaining a lot of prominence right now in the terrorist financing typologies, methods, and trends. FinCEN in the US issued a really helpful advisory just last week outlining how destabilizing Iran is in supporting terrorist organizations in the Middle East. So we have Hamas, which are, of course, the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then we have the Houthis in Yemen. As you know, there's that civil war in Yemen. Iran itself is funded. It sells its oil reserves to China, Russia, and Syria. Of course, there is a major sanctions package against Iran, so they can't sell their oil on the, to most countries in the world, but there are some countries that don't abide by these sanctions, and so we see that Iran can make money here as well. Iran also sells weapons and drones to Russia, which of course is very useful to Russia at the moment because, again, very heavily sanctioned country. They do not have access to many countries in the world to be able to, for example, purchase any military equipment, to be able to purchase replacement parts, but Iran is willing to provide. Iran, as I mentioned, moves money through neighboring countries. So, for example, through Lebanon and in various currencies, including US dollars. Iran is also known for creating very complex legal structures, and they often incorporate so-called trading companies or general trading companies, which are really shell companies, as well as they make use of their own exchange houses or currency exchange houses. Of course, to create these sham companies, they provide false documents, financial services providers, and they also carry out remittances under pretend identities and pretend recipients. And then they also, Iran has also started setting up sham NPOs, particularly religious NPOs or cultural NPOs. Next slide, please.
Oh, Sorry,
There's one
there
missing
we
here,
go.
yeah. So you
Yeah.
see here, I just wanted to show you a map of the Middle East. And again, to make you aware that when we talk about, for example, when we talk about Iran and the high risk country that is Iran, it's not just Iran, right? You have to look at all these countries that are either facilitate Iran's activities, and those are shown in blue. So you have Turkey, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Sudan. And then you have the three countries that are in orange, and these are the ones where Iran is channeling their funds to be used by terrorists in those countries. And that includes Lebanon, the Gaza Strip in Israel, as well as Yemen. So that's why it's really important to look at this from when you look at country risk, geographical risk from a very broad perspective. Okay, so turning our attention to another sanctioned country, um, again linked to Iran, and we see how how all these linkages in terms of fundraising, raising money for the war machine, um, and now Russia also has other means of evading sanctions and fundraising. And one is that they use professional enablers in third countries. So you might have heard the term professional money laundering. Professional money laundering in FATF speak refers to persons or types of persons that are professionals. So, for example, lawyers or accountants or company formation agents that will be misused by a sanctions evader, let's say, to circumvent sanctions. Um, the persons or the professional enablers are not just in Russia or maybe Iran, but there are other countries in the world that have been exposed as having some players that are sympathetic and that are willing to do this for Russia. So Cyprus has long been an ally of Russia. There's a lot of, let's say, Russian deposits in Cyprus. There's a long time presence of Russian assets in Cyprus. So that's not really a surprise. United Arab Emirates, again, not really a surprise because they don't apply Russian sanctions that the rest of the world applies. We have all other countries are the BVI, Canada, UK, Switzerland, Isle of Man, Belarus, and Turkey. Um, Russians who are sanctioned will often try to evade sanctions by transferring their assets into the names of other trusted persons. So that could include in the names of family members. There's been an instance where one Russian oligarch transferred his assets to one of his bodyguards. So this makes it really difficult because let's say if you get a new client and you screen their name and you see they're not sanctioned in Russia and they might not even be Russian, and you think it's fine, you really have to dig deep to make sure that there is no Russian connection to a sanctioned individual, because sometimes, very often, it's not obvious at first sight. So you need to dig and ask these questions. But some of the red flags that will come up is, for example, there will be some Russian link and you'll see a very, very, very complex structure and perhaps a structure that moves around the world. So you have companies that are incorporated, then 2 years later they're taken over by another company, and then 2 years later there's a trust over here. And when you look at the directors of these companies, oftentimes they're, for example, they're the directors of a service provider. They're not really a real director, if I can put it that way, director in name only. So really important to dig because these schemes can be very, very complicated right now. The other way is, of course, diluting share ownership. So as we know, Russian sanctions, if a person owns 49% or they own less, the whole enterprise might not be subject to sanctions. So again, transferring those shares in names of trusted associates. And then again, increased use of cryptocurrency. So in the last couple of weeks, we have seen that there was a Russian crypto exchange that has been sanctioned in the US. And we also saw it when Binance, when a lot of this dirty laundry came out on Binance, we did see that Binance um, uh, had actually allowed many Russian sanctioned individuals to evade sanctions through the use of its platform. Okay. Okay, so the other interesting country from the sanctions perspective is the DPRK. And as I mentioned, it was kind of not a dormant program because obviously the sanctions were enforced, but not much was happening. Now, Russia has basically thrown a spanner into everything. As you know, as you might know, one of the supporting bodies of the uh, UN sanctions against North Korea was the UN expert panel on North Korea. And basically, this expert panel published reports twice a year, and it described the new techniques or anything on the observations that these experts saw on how North Korea was getting their funding. Russia now has vetoed the continuation of this UN panel. Now, the UN panel did have, the Security Council and the UN panel did have some weaknesses. One of them, as I mentioned, was that no new designations were made for 5 or 6 years or so. So, it's really interesting to see what's going to happen next. Some countries have said that they would take on the work or some of the work of this UN panel. There is a possibility that the work of this expert panel and the whole DPRK sanctions regime will be transferred to the main UN body. Um, and there's also talk about that some countries might have a UN DPRK sanctions designation on a country basis. So, for example, like we have for Russia, which are not UN sanctions. So, a lot of interesting things that might happen here, which might result in a flurry of designations because the UN panel of experts had made many, many, many recommendations for designations of persons that it saw were benefiting from the worldwide financial system. But because of this Security Council that the designations had to be approved by everyone, you often had holdouts like Russia and China, so no new designations were made. So I think this opens up, it's bad news, but it might also become very good news for the designations, for this program. It might give it a little bit of life. Now, in terms of what North Korea is doing, they're laundering their funds through bank accounts in China. We already knew that. But also through Russia, which seems to be a new ally of North Korea, as well as through the Lao People's Democratic Republic. They have been engaged in illegal wildlife trade in southern Africa, cash smuggling, again in Africa, Western Africa this time, Niger and Nigeria. Most of their activities are funded by malicious cyber activities. For example, ransomware or cyber attacks. And they also make use of cryptocurrencies activities, not all of these being regulated. So, for example, they will make money through cryptocurrency mining, gambling, hacking, and then they will seek to convert that into fiat by use of brokers, especially in China, and also by exploiting various chain hopping mechanisms, as well as using mixers. So we saw Tornado Cash had been sanctioned in the US. And for a while, it wasn't the preferred method for North Koreans. And now it seems like North Koreans are using Tornado Cash again. And we have another well-known one would be Simbad.
Sorry, Tornado Cash. I've never heard
Yes.
of that before.
Okay, so Tornado Cash so it's basically a cryptocurrency mixer. So as you know, cryptocurrencies, when you transfer cryptocurrencies between wallets, anyone can go on the blockchain and trace where the funds went to. Now, of course, you don't know who's behind the wallets at first glance, but if you have sufficient analytics, you can probably figure out the links. Now, what Tornado Cash does is that you send your money to your crypto assets to this mixer, and they divide it into very, very, very small particles because in cryptocurrencies, you can have up to 8 decimal points, right? So it's like having fractions of a dollar, very small fractions of a dollar. And they commingle that with all the different transactions. So then when those funds are sent out again, you break that chain on the blockchain, it's much more difficult to trace. So obviously it's a preferred tool of criminals because the money does not get traced back to them. So now, I mean, on the good news, I was listening to this podcast, and Chainalysis has a very, very novel product that it is using to be able to reconstruct what Tornado Cash basically breaks in the chain, which is really good news. So it, there's some advances on this front, but even then, only about 20% of assets that are identified and that go through Tornado Cash are actually can be ultimately regained or recaptured. So still not a lot of success.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so again, talking about geographic risk, I often hear clients say, well, we don't have any proliferation financing risks because we don't deal with North Korea. But I have RUSI, which was the Royal United Institute for Security in the UK. It's part of the London King's College in London. Very, very, very useful publications. Like, I cannot recommend this website enough. It's got really nice research, very, very in depth. And one of the things they did is that they made this nice table of the countries that the DPRK uses to evade sanctions. And so you see that when you look at your risk of proliferation financing of sanctions evasion in terms of North Korea, it's not just North Korea, right? You have China, you have Hong Kong, Singapore, Zambia, etc. So this is what I'm saying. You really have to stay on top of geopolitical trends to be able to correctly identify your risk, because otherwise you might be looking at it from a very, very narrow perspective.
Great. And what was that website again?
Royal United Security Institute, RUSI.
Royal United Security. Oh, yes, RUSI.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just writing it down. Sorry. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so another update on sanctions, which to me was a little bit, it's something to pay attention to. Again, in the area of country risk, we're not used to seeing sanctions on Israel. And now there have been designations against Israelis, particularly Israeli settlers, and those are made under the global human rights sanctions regulations. So there have been some individuals, I believe we're up to 8 individuals and 2 groups, and those include targeted financial sanctions. So now, you as a practitioner, you should go back to your list of Israeli clients and make sure that you correctly identify the country risk that you attribute to those clients from Israel. Next slide, please. Okay, more on cryptocurrencies. So one of the preferred virtual assets of sanctions evaders are stable coins. So this chart, which has been produced by Chainalysis, and again, Chainalysis has a lot of really good public research that's available on its website. So if you go there, they have an annual crypto crime report. So it's really, really interesting to see. So you see that the share of illicit transactions involving stable coins has dramatically increased over the last few years. And this is because obviously sanctions evaders cannot use US dollars. They don't want to use US dollars. But stable coins are often pegged to the US dollar. So you're getting the security of the US dollar, the stability of the US dollar, without actually dealing in dollars. So for those who think that stable coins are less risky, this might not be the case. Okay, so let's turn our attention to artificial intelligence. And we have another poll question.
All right. So the poll question is, do you use artificial intelligence or machine learning to assist in your AML CFT efforts? Yes or no? And it's interesting because we actually had a very similar polling question just, I want to say last month on AI, because we kind of did an AI update, and we'll continue to do that. And I was finding it interesting that there were not that many people. No, I wasn't finding it interesting. I actually said, it makes sense to me that not a lot of people are using AI yet in the compliance world, because there's still a lot of risk with data privacy, data leakage, especially with these chat GPT tools. Being in the tech industry myself, we are actually exploring and developing some AI tools for onboarding, clients, helping that we'll be incorporating into our system. But we had to what I call, I put the guardrails in. I had to tell the
Mm-hmm.
developers, nope, we must have it all stay here. Nothing can go out to that server or that instance. And so yeah, so I do see that in a give me a couple of months, I'll be able to show you how it works. But I see that's going to turn around really quickly. Sorry, I'm just looking at the polling results, and it's the
Mm-hmm.
same.
Okay.
There's only 25% saying yes that they are using AI tools. 75% are saying no. I predict in a year that'll be flipped.
Yes.
Is what I predict. We just need to have the tools, as you mentioned earlier. Sometimes they're a little clunky
Mm-hmm.
right now, but in a year's time, the tech industry is going to figure that out and how to keep it cyber secure, data privacy secure, user friendly, and transparent. We need to understand how an AI tool is working, and I I again am a very much I still want a human
Mm-hmm.
looking at everything. I don't want the tool, I don't want the software making risk assessment decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as the tech providers create these tools, they're going to figure that out too. Anyway, so thank you for those who did answer. Yeah, it was a 25 to 75%
5%. Yes.
with still fewer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's so much momentum right now, so many resources being put into developing AI and machine learning tools for AML CFT compliance that I think in definitely, if not next year, in a couple of years, we'll see much, much greater use of it. And maybe, it's not going to be maybe it might not be a sea change, but it's going to be in subtle ways. So for example, if we look at the current challenges with the onboarding function, right? When you onboard a client, are your results that you get from your initial screening, are they complete? Are they accurate? Are you finding everything you need? When you have false positives, how do you distinguish between false positives? Is it a manual exercise?
Yeah.
You click on every one and say, this is not the right date of birth, this is not the right gender, this is not enhanced due diligence. Again, a lot of people don't really do the enhanced due diligence that is risk responsive. It's a very mechanical
Mm-hmm.
process. Hopefully with AI, it can zero in on the risks that are there with that particular prospective client to enable you to make better decisions on what enhanced due diligence looks like. Risk rating process, very subjective sometimes, very inconsistent between clients. The weightings sometimes, how do you do the weightings? You need to back test your system, checking the veracity of documents, and also the fact that this is a manual process most of the time. So next slide. I'm just going to move through these a little bit quicker because we are running out of time. But
Oh
again, some
yeah, we are.
challenges in transaction analysis. Very, very challenging. You have large amounts of data. You need to somehow interpret that data to find the patterns, to find things that don't make sense, to detect activity that is not usual given a certain client type. And I know many large banks already do this, but it is very, very expensive to implement. It's often bespoke to the bank. Um, and it is very clunky. So next slide, please. So in the sense of risk assessments, again, currently risk assessment, a manual process. A lot of the time, you figure out the factors that you're going to use. You need to calibrate the model, make sure that it's consistent between assessment. It's not too subjective. Back testing and integrating any changing risks. So, for example, country risk, like we've been talking about. This session, make sure that that's always integrated into your risk assessment model. So next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, AI is not going to be the solution for everything. You need AI and machine learning depend on a large amount of data of very high quality, both internal and external. So persons who want to use AI or developers who want to develop AI software or tools for the compliance function really, really need to have access to a lot of data on compliance. Data security and cybersecurity, of course. There needs to be a needs assessment, like what exactly you're going to be using AI for. It might be little parts, it might be, more of your program, but you really need to think about what do you need. One size does not fit all. The tools that you have, the AI tools, will need to be modified, and as you go along, this is not something that you'll get right off the bat. It does require quite a bit of tinkering. You need a governance model. So who's going to look after this whole model? Who's going to make sure that it's updated, that it works properly, that it's not biased, for example, that it generates quality data. Regulators have not to date published a lot on their expectations of the use of AI. So I think this is also a really big gap that needs to be filled to make sure that any AI solutions meet regulatory expectations. Staff needs to be trained on AI. AI will be a lot more complex. It is a technological solution, so it will require a lot of staff upskilling. And then, of course, you cannot have complete reliance on AI. You always need to have this human oversight.
Yeah, our tech guys call it human in the loop, HITL.
Yeah.
So there's another acronym for everybody.
Exactly. So to wrap it up, so here are my 4 predictions for the hot trends and hot topics: terrorism financing, virtual currencies, asset recovery, and artificial intelligence. I think those 4 topics will really be the focus in the next 2 years to come.
All right. Yep.
And I have one last slide for everyone, for everyone to be really mindful that your changes to AML CFT regulations don't happen in a vacuum. They will result from all the research, all the observation of the work that international organizations do, as well as geopolitical events. So you really have to keep up with that, keep up with what's happening in FATF, what is FATF issuing, what they're talking about, what's happening in the world. Criminals have really strong incentives to exploit regulatory vulnerabilities and operational vulnerabilities. They're always seeking to avoid detection. There's huge amounts of money to be made. So you always have to be on top of all the new trends. The country risk assessments have to consider it very broadly, consider all the geopolitical developments and the different links between the countries. One country will rarely just be high risk on its own. Oftentimes it will have countries that facilitate, or countries where the risk is felt. And then AI can help us free up some of those resources on day-to-day AML tasks to be able to focus more on this analytical, forward-looking work. And that's all I had to say for today.
Okay. We have a ton of questions and 2 minutes, so I'm having to pick one.
Okay.
And Kevin, you're the winner because, again, I come from a trusted corporate service background myself, where we provided nominee directors. And he's asking, he goes, most professional service providers that do provide these director services, such as nominee directors, they're under AML regs themselves and quite well versed and very aware of the risks of their role. And and of course, under the magnifying glass themselves. So for a bank, for instance, or some other service provider who is onboarding a company where a regulated service provider is providing, directors,
Mm-hmm.
to me, and maybe this is just more my experience, and I'd like to get your viewpoint. I would still consider that a kind of a lower to standard risk, as long as I knew that that directorship was AML regulated in a strong jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that, or do you still think that that should be quite, kind of more of a higher risk or under more of a magnifying glass?
Yeah, so FATF does allow countries to allow what we call simplified due diligence in some scenarios. And one of the scenarios is where your potential client is regulated for AML CFT in a reputable jurisdiction. And it is something that has to be a low risk situation. So you couldn't apply it like, let's say there's a PEP, the politically exposed person, or if there is another high risk factor, you couldn't apply this kind of low risk simplified due diligence scenario. But if you're looking at, there's no high risk indicators, then yes, you would be allowed to, according to FATF standards anyway. And of course, each country interprets that differently, what they have in the regulations, but according to FATF standards, that would be an allowable use of simplified due diligence.
Oh, okay. So yeah, great. So I was applying it all correctly. And I guess the only thing I would want to know personally is
Mhm.
who are they acting on behalf of, especially if it's a nominee directorship. I would
Yeah.
still want to dig down. I think 20 years ago it was probably okay to go, yeah, they're regulated, we're fine.
Mhm.
We didn't need to dig down. But now with the beneficial ownership and control, requirements, and I do think that is quite key. And I think if you are a service provider, you need to be willing. And I might be putting myself in a frying pan here, but I think I should have the right to know who is who you're acting for, and as long as
Mhm.
there's nothing that you're trying to hide there. Okay, we're top of the hour, so I don't like to go over, but what I will do is I will go through a lot of some of these questions. uh, Tom, somebody is asking about ID verification platforms. I think we do have a webinar coming up, I want to say in July, about adopting ID verification tools. Um, can you confirm that for me, Tom? I think he's
Yes, we are.
listening in. Yeah.
It is in July. Yeah,
Okay, in July. So yeah, so
yeah.
keep an eye. If you're here today, if you've registered, you will get that invite automatically, because there are some things that it's mostly the data privacy updates. There's a data privacy impact assessment you have to do when you are doing any kind of new tools. So we will probably be doing a couple of webinars, a couple of like 2 a month. Usually in the past, it's been just one a month, but things are changing so fast that I'm even finding myself going, no, we need to do that one now. We need to do that one sooner rather than later. So do keep following us on LinkedIn. Do invite your colleagues, share your certificates on LinkedIn. Spread the word. Like I said, we keep this free to help the industry and the AML professionals like yourself kind of stay up to date, because it's a lot. There's a lot going on. And Justine, thank you again so much for joining us. And I really appreciate everything that you and Elizabeth, your colleague, do for us with sharing your advice. And again, just thank you very much. If anybody else is interested in speaking and being a guest or sponsoring Gray Matters, feel free to reach out to myself. If you are struggling with your sanctions and your, keeping your due diligence, everything organized, you can reach out to Thomas. He can schedule demos of Silo for you. So again, thank you very much. Everybody have a wonderful day. And Justine, I'm sure I will see you
Yeah.
soon, especially when I'm in Cayman this summer.
Excellent. Thank you so much and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Anti-money laundering compliance and customer and vendor onboarding involves multiple processes that must be done correctly and by the right people in the most efficient way. The tasks include gathering customer and vendor ID and verification documents, screening against sanctions and politically exposed persons lists, analyzing any reputational risk, periodic monitoring to assess any changes and updating due diligence, and staff training on money laundering, terrorist financing, bribery and corruption awareness and risks, as well as keeping them up to date on your policies and procedures and new regulatory requirements. In addition to the onboarding processes being strictly followed and documented, management must have access to critical compliance metrics and information to steer the company through regulatory waters and mitigate customer and other risks. With Silo Compliance System, these obligations become much more efficient. With Silo, your staff can enter the customer's information and upload due diligence documents and any other documents that you require. Key information entered about your customer automatically calculates a risk score, a calculation using a risk-based approach determined by you at initial implementation of Silo. In addition, if you have screening enabled, when the customer's name is first entered into Silo, the name is checked against sanctions, politically exposed persons lists, and adverse media. You'll see results of screening immediately and can review any potential hits right away. And with screening enabled, your customers and vendors are continuously monitored for any sanctions advisories, helping you get ahead of any potential reputational risks. No company is too small to benefit from using Silo. Even if your onboarding processes seem under control today, if one key staff member becomes unavailable or there is any increase in your customer portfolio, compliance with strict onboarding and review processes can quickly overwhelm a small company and put you at risk. Plus, implementing Silo can reduce the need to hire additional staff to manage compliance obligations and reduce your risk of non-compliance regulatory penalties and continued inspections. No one goes through an inspection or audit with great ease, but several users have reported that their inspections went more smoothly and with Silo they had improved outcomes. Reach out to us today to schedule a demo of Silo.